webinar on computing, cloud computing, and internet bandwidth discussion here today. Today, again, my name is Alexander. I'm a Client Relations Marketing Director at TechGen, and today I'll be your host. In this webinar, Reed Johnson will provide helpful tips and information on the subject of cloud computing, where he will provide, again, the comparison of on-premise servers versus cloud solution and which options fits your business best. We'll also have Matt Nelson here and Buddy Bronstein from Integra and Fostar Telecom to elaborate and share with us some insightful information about various bandwidth technologies that are available to businesses and which ones may work for you better than the others. And just to point out quickly some housekeeping items for those that may be joining us the first time. On a lower right side of your monitor screen, you should be able to see a chat window. It's right underneath the Participants tab. Go ahead and use that chat window to send in your questions or maybe comments or any kind of recommendations to myself or our presenters. And just to let you know, we will have at least 10 minutes for a Q&A session after each presentation. So I'm sure we will be able to address all the questions today. Also keep in mind that the recording of this webinar along with the presentation slides will be available in this meeting space for 30 days. And I'll also communicate this recording and the presentation slides throughout, for next couple of weeks to all of our partners, customers, and prospects. So again, that will be available for you to come back and listen into or review the slides. And lastly, again, we will hold a drawing of a $250 Visa gift card to those who have registered and attended this webinar. And just a quick overview of our presenters today. Reed Johnson is the president and founder of TechGen Consulting Inc. He has founded TechGen in the year of 2000, and since then he has been working with businesses in the greater Twin Cities area, providing them with support of their IT infrastructure. We also have Matthew Nelson today. He's a senior sales engineer from Integra, and Buddy Bronstein will be with us as well from Fostar Telecom. Both of these companies, again, they're really focused on internet providing services, voice over IP services, etc. And I'm sure those guys will mention a few of those things to us as well. Well, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first presenter, Reed Johnson, the president and founder of TechGen Consulting Inc. And I'll kind of give him the right to navigate through this and discuss further on cloud computing. Reed, welcome, and go ahead and take the wheel.
All right. Thank you, Alexander. Okay. Well, again, as Alexander said, I'm Reed Johnson from TechGen Consulting, and we provide outsourced IT support for small businesses. Today, we'll be talking about cloud computing, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end of my presentation if there are any questions from anyone. And then we'll move on to bandwidth technologies with Matthew Nelson and Buddy Bronstein. So we'll move on here to my presentation, cloud computing. So I'm asked a lot, what is the cloud? And different companies that offer cloud services have different definitions of cloud services. For the purpose of this presentation today, cloud computing is using hosted infrastructure to provide services that were traditionally deployed in an office environment. So these things are email services, file storage, backup, and collaboration. We have a lot of customers that have traditional on-premise file servers, and those servers are what store their files, what back up their data, and over time, that type of information is moving to the cloud, and computers are connecting to the cloud to access those files. Another example is email. We have a lot of customers that have Microsoft Small Business Server and are running Microsoft Exchange for their office email, and we're helping our clients move those services to the cloud. And I'll give you a couple of examples of those services today. Finally, backup and collaboration. Backup is basically taking your data from your computer network in your office and storing it out on the internet. in an encrypted, protected format. And collaboration, we talk about tools like Microsoft SharePoint and Google Apps for easily sharing information with other members of your team. So when we're talking about cloud computing, we're talking about taking these traditional roles of servers and moving them to hosted infrastructure where there's additional efficiencies that can be achieved. So what are the advantages of the cloud? Simply physical security, infrastructure security, lower cost, free upgrades to software, and no hardware purchases. Without belaboring these too much, I'll mention physical security. Oftentimes when we work with a new customer, we find that their server is sitting in a closet, or it's sitting under someone's desk, or it's kind of off on a table in the main area of the office, and that's pretty insecure. If someone were to break in, they could just yank it off the table and walk away with it. If there was any sort of malicious act by anyone, they would be able to mess with it. So we help our clients move their servers and protect their servers by putting them in rooms with doors and locks and that sort of thing. But when you're talking about moving to the cloud, the servers are not in anyone's office. Instead, they're in data centers. And data centers are often, they may be underground, they may be in a highly secured building. There will be security personnel, there will be fingerprint readers, and all kinds of levels of security to get into that infrastructure. So from a physical standpoint, having your data in the cloud is much more secure than many offices that we see. When we talk about infrastructure security, we're talking about the connections to those servers. And again, when you're talking about having servers in a data center, there are levels of security where you have security personnel and IT personnel that are monitoring the internet connections all the time. They're evaluating traffic that's coming in and out, and they're making sure that only what's happening is what really should be happening. When you have a traditional on-premise environment, companies often are not willing to pay for that level of security, and as a result, there's less security there. Lower cost in some cases. It depends on the size of your organization. We have clients that have very few employees, maybe 15 employees or below, where cloud services can be very affordable and lower cost than purchasing a server. And then we have customers that have many more employees that have chosen to stay on-premise for now because of where price points are at for certain services. And over time that will change, but in a lot of cases, and in some cases, you can achieve lower cost by moving to the cloud. Free upgrades, this is a big one. If you're subscribing to a service rather than purchasing a piece of software, you will often get upgrades as part of that subscription fee. So as new versions of software come out, as new versions of Microsoft Exchange come out, for example, you will automatically receive upgrades to that platform as your cloud service provider releases them. And then finally, no hardware purchases. If we're talking about storing our data in the cloud, we're not actually buying a server. We're just subscribing to someone that offers that service. So those are some of the advantages of moving your data to the cloud. Some examples of service providers, and you all may have heard of some of these before. Microsoft Office 365 is a very popular cloud service provider. They offer email, file storage, and SharePoint. There's Google Apps for business, where they offer email, file storage, and collaboration. Rackspace Hosted Exchange, they offer email. And then SugarSync and Ignite are file storage and backup providers. And I'm going to be talking about a few of these on the next few slides. Looking one by one, Microsoft Office 365 offers email, file storage, and SharePoint. The price per mailbox is only $4 per user per email, and $6 per user for their email, their chat software, SharePoint access, anti-spam, and antivirus. So for a small organization, subscribing to Microsoft Office 365 as an example is very low cost, potentially compared to purchasing your own server. Looking at Google Apps, this is kind of the other big provider that we hear about a lot, they offer a platform that's free for 10 users, and they give you 5 gigabytes of storage for free. If you have more people than that, then you're looking at $5 per user per month, and they provide 25 gigabytes of mailbox storage and 5 gigabytes of file storage per person. But you have to use their platform. You're using their tools. You're going to google.com/apps and you're signing in, and some people don't like that interface, so that's why there are other providers available. They also have a $10 per month option, which includes all the email and storage, but also email archiving and backup retention. Moving on to Rackspace Hosted Exchange, they offer a hosted exchange mailbox for $10 per month for 25 gigabytes of storage. And if you need a copy of Microsoft Outlook, you can subscribe to that as well for $2 per month. Most people have Microsoft Office installed on their systems, so they don't have to subscribe to that. But $10 per month was really the going rate, between $10 and $12 was really the going rate for hosted exchange mailboxes until Microsoft came out with their Office 365 platform. And as you can see, like I mentioned before, they brought the price down to $4 per month for basically the same service. Moving on to file storage, SugarSync is a file storage and file syncing tool where they charge basically $5 per month for 30 gigabytes, $10 per month for 60 gigabytes, and each person in your office would subscribe to SugarSync, and they would be able to synchronize their files to the cloud as well as back up their computer, and that's a pretty low cost. Ignite is another competitor to SugarSync, and they bundle, instead of on a per user basis, they bundle in groups of 5 users, and they offer their service for basically $25 per month for 5 users to provide 150 gigabytes of storage and on up from there. So as you can see, the cost of online storage is very limited compared to what you may be spending with a server on premise. And that's what we'll move on to next. We spec out servers for a lot of our customers over time, and here I took an example of a server that we configured for a title insurance company that has 5 users. The hardware came out to about $4,000, a little bit more, and that was a Dell server with layers of redundancy and all of the things that we like to see with an on-premise server. And then they needed the software to manage their email, to manage their files, and we included what's called Microsoft Small Business Server, which is $925. So they've got a total of $5,123 for that server. But then we didn't really cover battery backup. We didn't really cover tech support service. We didn't cover how are we going to back up the data that's on that server. And what about the physical security? Where is it going to be located? What levels of protection are there? So purchasing an on-premise server, you're looking at an upfront cost of about $5,000, and you still have to deal with these other issues that I mentioned below. If we compare that to, If we compare that to using some of these cloud services, again, we're looking at that same 5-person office and the on-premise server being about $5,000. Typically, when we order a server for a customer, we are looking at a lifetime of that server of about 4 years. Servers typically have a 3-year warranty, and you can extend the warranty by 1 year if you want to. But if we spread out that payment, which potentially you could do if you're leasing or something like that, you're looking at about $106 per month. If we look at Microsoft Office 365, which is the hosted email, which is one function that that on-premise server is providing. And if we look at SugarSync, which is the hosted file storage and backup, which is another service that that server is providing, the combined cost of those two for 5 people is about $45 per month, or $539 per year, or only about $2,157 over 4 years. So you can see that subscribing to this type of platform your cost over the length of that term will be significantly less. If we instead went with Rackspace hosting and Ignite, again, for 5 people, you're looking at about $75 per month or $3,600 over about 4 years. So as you can see, the cost of hosted services in the cloud, moving your data to the cloud, can be a lot less than purchasing your own server. Now, depending on the size of the office, these numbers, of course, change. But for an office of 5 people, it makes sense to really look at the cloud. Now, using the cloud, we're taking care of security. We're taking care of battery backup for these devices because they're sitting in a data center where they have redundant power, they have generators, often they have connections to multiple power grids. We're taking care of a number of those issues that we didn't even address in that $5,123 purchase that we made up front. So definitely something to consider for small offices, and there are benefits there. So what's really needed to move to the cloud? If you are going to be moving your services to the cloud and you haven't made upgrades to your network infrastructure in some time, it's an important time to look at that. You want to make sure that you have a current router and switch. Sometimes we go into offices and we see that they have network routers and network switches that may be 4, 5, 6 years old. Well, they just can't handle some of the faster internet connections that companies are starting to install today, and they become a bottleneck. So we can help customers make sure that they have current routers and switches. You also want to make sure that you have a fast internet connection. If instead of having everything in your office, if now it's out in a server on the internet, you want to make sure that your connection to that server is as fast as you can possibly afford. So we look at services, we look at broadband services, high-speed wireless services for our customers, and we have Integra on the line today that will be talking more about that. Next, we have dual internet connections. If everything is in the cloud and your internet goes down, you lose connectivity to all of those services. So having dual internet connections is really important. The cost of internet connections has been coming down over time, so we recommend that you have 2. You have a primary connection and you have a backup connection. And if you have one of those current routers that I was talking about, they will automatically switch you over to your backup connection in the event that your primary connection goes down. Finally, you also need a great IT support vendor, someone who understands the benefits, the process, the support for moving to the cloud. Just because your data and your information is sitting in a data center doesn't mean that you don't need good IT support. You need someone to configure your machines, you need someone to support your infrastructure, and that's what we do as an example for our clients. So moving to the cloud is really quite easy. It's becoming more and more easy, and we've helped a lot of customers do that. And some of the vendors that I mentioned here are just a few, really, of the many vendors that are available for cloud services. Today I primarily looked at email and file storage. One thing I want to mention before I wrap up is all of these providers have the capability of connecting your iPhone, your Android phones, your iPads, your Android tablets as well. There are Ignite mobile applications. There are SugarSync mobile applications. So if I'm on the road and I need a spreadsheet that I was working on in the office, I can pull out my phone, I can navigate through SugarSync, and I can find that file. I can open it up on my phone and I can look at it. Now, I may not be able to make many changes to it because my phone isn't the greatest tool for doing that, but if I need to look at something, I've got the ability to do that using those tools. So all of these service providers have applications that you can install on your phone to facilitate mobile access, which is great. And that wraps up my presentation. At the end here, though, we have a poll question that do you feel that cloud computing plays an important role in your business technology environment? And the members here that are attending this call, if you just want to type your answer, yes or no, into the chat box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. You can send it to Alexander, and he will tally up that information and let us know here at the end of the presentation. But for now, I'll open it up to questions. If anyone has questions, feel free to type them into the chat window, and you'll be able to send that question to Alexander, and he'll read it aloud for everyone, and then I'll respond. So for now, I'll be quiet for a couple of minutes, and we'll see if we have any questions. And I'll turn it over to you, Alexander.
Thank you, Reed, for this insightful presentation. And as I'm kind of seeing some of the folks here today answering, and we're definitely seeing, I'm definitely getting the yeses that cloud computing does have a important role in the business technology and environment today. And just actually came from the online marketing seminar that was here in Twin Cities today, and we talked about technology and how small businesses and medium-sized businesses are really investing into the technology and modern technology and using the cloud services. And there's so many various applications, like emails, CRM software, client management softwares out there, and even monitoring softwares. All of those things are really in the cloud. That's something that has been developing for quite some time and been available to larger enterprises and big corporations, and now definitely available to a small business, medium-sized business market. So that's great. Maybe one question that I'd like to ask Reed about is, where do you think is like the break-even point here for a business to consider? Yes, I'm going to go with the cloud. Yes, it works well. Like we've seen an example of 5 people. What if it's 12 people or 18 people or 20 people? Is it still more efficient to go with the cloud, or is it maybe like there's a hybrid solution that's available? Kind of like to elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure, you bet. From the research that I've done and from where pricing has continued to move, we're seeing that for email services, if you want Microsoft Exchange, if you want cloud file storage services, we're seeing a good kind of break-even over a 4-year period, really, is anywhere in the 10 to 15 employee range, 10 to 15 users. So again, though, it depends on the needs of the organization. Some companies are running line of business software. They actually need to have a server in their office that's running a special server component that programs on each of their PCs or Macs talk to. So for some of those customers, a good example would be an engineering firm. If you're using AutoCAD, for instance, you can't really use AutoCAD with SugarSync. It just doesn't work. If you're using QuickBooks and you have multiple people that are connecting to your QuickBooks data file at the same time, we can use SugarSync or we can use Ignite, but we have to be very specific with how we configure it, because traditionally, if you have multiple people accessing a database like QuickBooks or a licensing database that AutoCAD would use, you're going to be connecting to an on-premise server. But for those offices that either don't have that specific need or we're able to work around it, we find that anywhere from the 10 to 15 is a good break-even based on the needs of the company, and that's what we really help our clients with.
Great. Thanks so much, Reed. A couple more questions here for you. Got a question from Beth. What about a very small office where I just want to back up our one server daily? I don't need email support, but I just want to back up for data for emergency needs.
Sure. If you just have files that are on a server and you want to back those up to the cloud, then absolutely the cloud is a perfect option for you. A lot of times we see customers that have a server in their office and they're swapping tapes or they're backing up to a hard drive. And we always recommend that you have an on-premise backup, and that's good, but having an off-site backup is equally as important. So rather than swapping tapes and taking them home, putting them in your car or whatever happens, there are services. You could use SugarSync. You could use another product called Jungle Disk, which works really well. You've probably heard on TV and in commercials Carbonite. That's a cloud service that just provides backup. And there are others as well. And if you want to reach out to Alexander or to me, I can help you more with pricing and options for backing up that single server to the cloud. Absolutely, it's a good option.
Great. Thanks so much, and thanks, Beth, for a great question. Another question here from Matt. Is there a certain amount of bandwidth you might recommend based on the number of users when migrating services to the cloud? Also a good question here.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. When we're talking about migrating your files to the cloud, the way a lot of these tools work is, particularly, I'll talk about SugarSync and Ignite, the files are replicated to the cloud for backup purposes, but those files are also located on your local machine so that you can get to them quickly. So your internet connection is important, but the speed of it is important when you're talking about changes to those files and replicating those changes to the cloud and to other locations. Typically, we like to see customers that have at least a T1, so a 1.5 megabit connection. If possible, we would prefer that they have a 3 megabit connection. But on top of that, we're also recommending broadband cable or broadband type wireless solutions. And the options there from Comcast or Mediacom or wireless providers, there you're looking at 5 megs, 10 megs a second and higher. And, the more you can, the faster the better. Faster is not going to hurt. And the companies continue to drive the price of bandwidth down. So, in our office, for example, we have a Comcast internet connection. I think we have their 20 megabit service. We're paying, around $100 a month or so. And then we also have an Integra T1, and that's our backup connection. And it's a single 1.5 meg T1. We do a lot with the cloud, and that scenario works great for us. And we've got about 10 people in our office. So that's a good question.
Great, thanks. And probably have one more here before, while I'm switching to the Integra and Fostar presentation here. So does SugarSync and Ignite provide the backup software, or is it just done via the FTP client? And maybe you can also elaborate on what FTP client is for some of those that. Sure. For me, for example, who doesn't know?
Sure. So FTP is File Transfer Protocol, which is a way of sending files between different places on the Internet. Both SugarSync and Ignite provide their own piece of software that you install on each of your computers, Mac or PC, and that software is what your computer will use to send its data out to the cloud. And it's what your computer will use to receive changes from other people that are in your office that have maybe saved a file that you need access to. That same piece of software will download those changes from the cloud and make them available to you. So all of this happens transparently in the background. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to refresh anything. The software runs in the background, and it does the work for you, just like a server in your office sits in the closet and it does its work for you. So, good question.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Reed. Well, we're basically in a half an hour in our presentation, so I'd like to now formally introduce Matt Nelson, and I'll give him a wheel here in just one moment. And Matt Nelson is a senior sales engineer from Integra, and he'll touch base on bandwidth technologies, and that's really where we felt that is very relative to cloud computing and information content on here today is kind of goes hand in hand, cloud computing with bandwidth technology. You have to have good internet in order for you to maximize your potential with cloud computing. So I'm going to go ahead again and give the wheel here to Matt in just 1 second. Just bear with me. Here you go, Matt.
All right, thank you.
Perfect. And just going to be 1 sec while the technology catches on to us. Okay. Perfect. Well, I'll let Matt here to take the wheel over. And again, thanks everyone for tuning in. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks, guys, for having me. I really enjoyed Reed's presentation there. Some very relevant information. And I think it goes hand in hand with what I'm going to discuss today. I've got a number of slides here, and my intent was to talk about bandwidth technology from a very general perspective, what the industry standards are and what we see in the industry, not necessarily specific to Integra. Now, obviously, you're going to hear me plug Integra a couple of times, but so you know, I've been in this capacity with Integra as a sales engineer for approximately 5 years now, actually closer to 6, and I've been in this industry for about 14 years. So it's very important from an engineering perspective to understand the different types of access that a customer can purchase, whether that's from Integra or any carrier. If there's questions, please put those in the chat to Alex, and we can address those. We'll also take some time at the end of the presentation to address all of those questions. And excuse me, guys, if my voice is a little bit nasally. I'm getting over a cold, so hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Here's our agenda, and what I'm going to discuss in the first half of the presentation is the various access methods. These are the actual transport mediums that carriers use to deliver bandwidth to a location. In the second half of the presentation, we'll talk about how to connect multiple locations via those access methods. So I'll just jump right into it. The single most popular, I think, access medium for a small business these days is DSL. We've all heard of the multiple service operators, as they're known, which is your Comcast, your Cox Cable, and they use a different cable plant than your traditional carrier. They use a coax cable plant, but the technology that they're delivering over that medium is equivalent to or the same as DSL. From the traditional local exchange carrier's perspective, DSL is a very inexpensive way to deliver relatively high bandwidth. It's widely available. Every major metropolitan area is going to have some type of DSL access, typically from multiple carriers. The primary advantage, again, is the cost of DSL as well as the potential download speed that you can receive. Everyone knows, though, that your uploads are capped, and that can present challenges in certain cases. The upload speeds typically range anywhere from 500K to 3 or 4 megs, while the download speeds you'll see anywhere from 1.5 megs up to 20, in some cases 50 megs. Again, very, very inexpensive to deliver, but can not necessarily be the best medium if you are looking for real-time applications like voice and video, things that are latency sensitive and demand a very stable, reliable connection. So from DSL, we move up to T1s or bonded T1s. Now, T1s have obviously been around for a very long time, and the advantage is they are not distance sensitive like a DSL type of product. They guarantee a symmetrical upload and download, 1.5 megs per T1. I think most people are probably familiar with T1s. This is the primary means of access for most small and medium businesses who need or use applications that are time or delay sensitive. So industry-wide, T1s have always been known as the most reliable type of service that you can buy. Obviously, the downside is the bandwidth that you can get out of a T1. A lot of people ask me if you can compare 1.5 megs over a T1 to 1.5 meg DSL access. And it's a hard question to answer because T1s are, again, symmetrical and guaranteed. So you get that 1.5 meg upload and download all the time no matter what. With DSL and broadband-based services, in many cases you can get higher download speeds, but it's in peaks and valleys. So depending on how many users are on that carrier's DSL network at any given point in time, the bandwidth will vary. You might get 5 megs at 2 a.m. in the morning, but you might only get 500K at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when kids get home from school. So when we start talking about upgrading from T1s and a DSL, there's several different ways to go. Traditionally, higher bandwidth products have always been DS3s or OC level services. DS3 stands for Digital Signal 3. Sometimes it's also referred to as a T3. A DS3 is approximately 45 megs. You can fit 28 T1s into a DS3 or 672 lines. OC stands for Optical Carrier Networking. And both DS3s and OC level services are delivered over fiber or SONET, synchronous optical networking, in the carrier's infrastructure. So that's a good thing because synchronous optical networking is highly resilient. If there is a cut in a fiber, information automatically flows in the other direction. So it's very resilient, but with that comes a cost to the customer. So typically, only very large organizations will purchase DS3 or OC level services. Often you'll hear, I have an OC3 or an OC12. Or an OC24 or OC48. It keeps going up depending on the amount of bandwidth associated with that carrier network. For instance, an OC3 is approximately 155 megs per second. Now, the downside, again, is the cost that goes along with delivering that service. You can expect that an OC3 is going to cost thousands of dollars. So it's not necessarily the most cost-efficient way to deliver services to a customer. The other thing that I think is often missed is that if you purchase a DS3 or an OC level service, the company has to provide the equipment to translate that signal and to translate that into something that their phone systems and that their computers and servers can use for internet access and for voice. So it's a proven technology, and it comes with the same service level guarantees that a T1 would come with, but again, typically the drawback is the cost of having those services delivered, as well as the cost of maintaining the routers to translate that signal into something that's usable. A relatively new technology that you'll see almost all carriers are adopting today is Ethernet over copper. And this was a response to the customer demand for higher bandwidth, similar to something you might find on fiber-based services without the same cost. Now, Ethernet over copper, so everyone knows, it is a DSL technology, but it's a synchronous high-speed DSL technology. So with that, there's a couple of things you have to consider. It is a distance-sensitive product, but it is delivered over copper loops that do not cost the carriers, like Integra, as much to deliver the services, but still maintains the reliability or the resiliency of a traditional fiber-based services. You'll notice that Ethernet over copper comes with a service level guarantee that is equal to or better than T1s or the fiber-based services that are available today. Now, every Tier 1 carrier that I'm aware of has an Ethernet over copper platform today and can deliver these services. You'll find that the bandwidths actually vary anywhere from 3 megs up to approximately 100 megs, all depending on the distance of the copper loops that are going to that customer's location, as well as the quality of those loops. When delivering Ethernet over copper like this, it's critical that the carrier do a qualification or an accurate assessment of the cable plan, of the copper loops that go into a facility. From Ethernet over copper, we move up to Ethernet over fiber. This is a response, again, to the marketplace that was demanding higher bandwidth, scalable bandwidth that is reliable, but does not cost as much as delivering a traditional DS3 or OC3, OC12. When delivering Ethernet over fiber, you get all of the same advantages of Ethernet over copper, except you get a much greater variance in the bandwidth that can be available. Most carriers, including Integra, offer speeds on fiber starting anywhere around 10 megs all the way up to gigabit and 10 gigabit per second speeds. Now, the drawback to Ethernet over fiber is its availability. All the carriers are building out their fiber footprints and bringing buildings on net as quickly as possible. The downside, though, is it costs a carrier a lot of money to put fiber into a building and to bring services up in that building. So a lot of times the cost is passed on to the customer, and you'll see that the pricing varies pretty wildly when it comes to Ethernet over fiber. It would behoove anybody on the call when looking for fiber-based services to make sure you know exactly whose fiber it is and how many carriers have fiber in a particular building. You know, the competition will typically breed better pricing for you. It pays to shop around. But verifying whose fiber that is and how it's delivered is very important. There are organizations that will bring fiber from a carrier into a building, and then they'll aggregate that bandwidth out to the various tenants. A good example is, you know, if you have a shopping mall or something of the sort where there might be hundreds of tenants, if you have one 200 meg fiber connection, then you need to know how that property management is segmenting out those services. The Tier 1 and Tier 2 carriers, when selling an Ethernet over fiber product, will guarantee that bandwidth. It'll be symmetrical up and down, and that'll be written into the service level agreement. But there are organizations, smaller carriers, property owners, who will take 100 customers and sell them 20 megs each, and then try and aggregate that over a smaller pipe, over a 200 meg pipe. So it's just something that's important to consider when you're looking at fiber-based services in a building. Now, when we start talking about multiple locations and how to connect multiple locations, using any of the access methods that we just talked about, there's a variety of ways to do it. Traditionally, point-to-point networks have been kind of the mainstay or the standard of how to connect multiple offices. Point-to-points are T1 access method, and they work very well. The drawback is the scalability. Since it's T1-based services, your increments of bandwidth will be in 1.5 meg increments. You can bond point-to-point T1s and get higher bandwidths, but every time you do that, I'm going to skip to the next slide here. Every time you do that, you have to bring another point-to-point into your hub location. So when you start thinking about that, every time this, in this illustration, every time this customer adds a location, they have to purchase another router at both ends of that point-to-point. They have to purchase the point-to-point circuit itself, and costs can kind of get out of control pretty quickly. In addition to the actual cost, they have to maintain each and every one of these routers. These are not something that is traditionally provided by the carrier. They have to maintain these routers and upgrade the software on them and keep those up to date. As Reed's presentation illustrated, the cost of hardware, the upfront cost is only one consideration. You might spend $5,000 on a server. In this case, you might spend $1,500 on a point-to-point router. But maintaining the software on that router and making sure that it's up to date, and the technical considerations, making sure you have an IT staff who knows how to program the routing between locations, is often the cost that people do not consider. So an alternative to point-to-point networks, and I'd say this is by far the most popular method, is to establish VPN tunnels over the internet. Now it's an inexpensive way to connect your locations, but there's obvious concerns anytime you pipe information over the public internet. Recent studies have shown that the security vulnerabilities that most companies experience are due to either wireless networks or their public-facing information. So the public-facing information would be anything that is exposed to the internet. The fact of the matter is that's how hackers, anybody with malicious intent who wants to affect an organization, that's how they're going to do it. They're either going to sit in the parking lot and try to attach to a wireless access point that hasn't been properly secured, or they're going to do it via the internet. So you need to take that into consideration anytime you encourage somebody to connect locations with a VPN over the internet. Now, in addition to the security concerns, VPNs over the internet require licensing and typically hardware and software on both sides of that connection. And again, that's something that has to be maintained, kept up to date, and typically an IT vendor is going to charge to do that. So what's the alternative? Let me show a quick illustration here that kind of helps explain that. You have all of the remote locations, and you're piping them across the internet back to a main location for access. So what's the alternative to that? Well, the most popular right now, and every Tier 1, Tier 2 provider in the marketplace has this, is what most people refer to as MPLS. What MPLS really is the carrier is providing the VPN. So instead of, as a company, as a business, instead of going out and purchasing my own firewall with remote VPN clients and loading that client software on the laptops that are at my other locations or the servers that are at my other locations, why not let the carrier provide it? This is a good alternative because MPLS services or private VPN services are available from every carrier and can span multiple access methods. So I can have a location that's on DSL. I can have a location that has a fiber connection. I can have a location that has Ethernet over copper, and I can connect all of those locations via the carrier access. I think the diagram here illustrates it very well. When I allow a carrier to connect my locations via MPLS, I never expose my information to the internet. I traverse that carrier's core network and never have to expose my information to the internet, thereby eliminating any security risks. You also have the advantage of the premise equipment being maintained by the carrier. So instead of purchasing a firewall with VPN clients, I order an MPLS-based service from my carrier, and each and every one of those devices is maintained by the carrier. When you have an MPLS network, you can also have the carrier blend in internet access as well as voice access to my network. So even though my information is not traversing the internet, I can open up a port through the carrier's private network to the internet. And I can also have the carrier provide a network-based firewall if I do not want to maintain a firewall at each connection or at each site. This is typically a highly efficient way to connect my locations. Now, there is an alternative to layer 3 or routed networks, MPLS networks, and this is growing in popularity by leaps and bounds. And that's a layer 2 or a private line network. Carrier Ethernet is how you'll hear it commonly referred to by most carriers. You might hear the terms Ethernet private line, Ethernet line, ELAN, E-tree. These are all private line networks similar to a point-to-point, except it's native Ethernet. And when it's native Ethernet, it gives the customer a couple of advantages. The carrier has access to that network and can monitor it, and thereby adhere to the service level agreements and the mean time to repair. It also allows the customer to make their own routing decisions. Since this is a native Ethernet network, it's just like plugging computers into a switch, except the locations are all across the country. So the customer can extend their LAN in a language that they already understand, that's Ethernet, and have a private, secure connection that never traverses the internet. Now, the primary disadvantage or drawback to carrier Ethernet private line networks like this is typically the access. We talked a little bit about Ethernet over copper and Ethernet over fiber, and traditionally getting fiber into a building or whether or not a building qualifies for Ethernet over copper is the biggest question mark. So that goes hand in hand with a carrier Ethernet private network. You have to make sure that those access methods are available to that business. Now, certain companies like Integra have expanded their Ethernet reach and can use your normal access mediums like T1s or in by T1, bonded T1s. So this is definitely worth talking to all of your customers about. It's something that is, as I mentioned, gaining popularity industry-wide, and it's something that people are going to ask about. In a carrier Ethernet network, a private line network, certain things like class of service and quality of service can be honored from site to site. And these are all offered as different components in the service from any carrier. That's important because you can prioritize information and use your bandwidth as efficiently as possible. Any carrier that is not making class of service or quality of service available on their Ethernet private line connections, that should send up a red flag, and you should question whether or not that carrier really knows what they're doing. Again, this is the buzzword in the industry right now, and people are looking to have Ethernet connections. This varies from a MPLS design in that the customer is still choosing making all of their routing decisions and which locations talk to which locations. But again, very, very popular and definitely a buzzword in the industry right now. So the real value proposition when it comes to Ethernet is the efficiency and the cost of operation. You can take applications, whether it's be video conferencing or applications that are very time sensitive, and you can have a guaranteed Ethernet, symmetrical Ethernet connection that allows these applications to operate as efficiently as possible. Now, when the carrier is maintaining the edge devices or those Ethernet devices, you don't have to worry about the capital expenditure of purchasing those devices. And again, Ethernet is what's being handed off to the customer, so that's a language that everyone already understands. It's plug-and-play technology. We talked a little bit about this already, but you can reduce operating costs when you don't have to purchase premise equipment. Business applications are critical these days. Real-time applications like video are something that's in high demand right now, and the only way to accurately address the applications is through an Ethernet-based service. But you don't want a Ethernet-based service that relies on DS3s or optical carrier networking that costs ridiculous amounts of money. So native Ethernet is again really the kind of the buzzword in the industry right now, and it's what people are looking for. I'm plugging my own network a little bit here. You see the Integra Cloud in the middle, but this is what you need to look for when you're considering a carrier and what type of access mediums or how to connect locations or even just deliver internet access. You need a carrier that's got a full product portfolio. So we have fiber-based services here. We have DS3s. We have bonded T1s. These are all things that Integra can do, as well as any other Tier 1 carrier that's out there. The one thing that we did not talk about specifically is network-to-network interfaces. Integra has a variety of network-to-network interfaces with all of the other Tier 1 carriers in the country. That's important because no one carrier can typically reach every single location, every single address in the entire country. So you need to be able to connect additional locations via other carriers' access methods, and that's really what a network-to-network interface is. So that's the end of the deck we have here, and I just wanted to ask a kind of a quick polling question to see what people, how they define a Tier 1 carrier. This is a question that I get a lot from IT vendors and people in the marketplace. So if you want to give me an idea of your definition of a Tier 1 carrier, go ahead and put that into chat and let me know what that is, and I'll address any questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt, for this insightful, very detailed presentation. Again, I've learned more than I came in with about bandwidth technology. So that's great. And again, I do appreciate it, and we do definitely appreciate this little partnership here we've done together with Fostar Telecom and Integra Telecom, and definitely some of those things are very relative to cloud computing and what we do on a daily basis here. Some of the folks here had to leave. Beth here just kind of said that she really appreciates the opportunity that she actually got this. And just to keep everyone in loop, we are going to be, I am going to be sending this out to all of our customers and prospects, and this will be available in the webinar platform itself and the WebEx. And you definitely guys can contact myself with any further questions that maybe haven't been answered today. We'll be able to reply to those. And, maybe one question we can tackle on here is how far away are we from having traditional LAN speed connectivity to the internet, Matt? And we can kind of wrap up after this.
Sure. No, that's a good question. It's something that I think the industry is demanding right now. Everybody wants gigabit to their house over fiber connections. Unfortunately, the drawback from a carrier's perspective is simply the cost and building fiber to every single person's home in the country. I think we're definitely a long ways from seeing any type of network like that, but I don't think it's unrealistic to expect that every address should be able to have speeds at around 10 megabit per second. And that's something that I think every carrier is striving towards right now, whether that be through Ethernet over copper or fiber-based services or DSL broadband type of services. The one thing that you're going to see is a cost difference depending on what type of services they are. Broadband and DSL type services are always going to be less expensive because they're not symmetrical and they do not come with service level guarantees. Those type of services are aggregated through hubs, through carrier hubs, and typically attached to much slower connections. I think in the cable industry you see that a lot. Cox and Comcast both have fiber nodes, residential fiber nodes, and they might have a gigabit or 2 gigabit of potential access at that fiber node, but they will put thousands upon thousands of customers onto that fiber node and typically subscribe it 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 or 4-to-1. And that's why you see such a fluctuation in bandwidth, and that's also why it's inexpensive, because you have so many customers. When you look at a true Ethernet-based service and the subscription ratio is 1-to-1, and that bandwidth, whether it be 10 meg or 100 meg, is guaranteed to that customer, there's going to be a cost associated with that. So it's critical that people understand that and know how to present that value to the customer that they're considering, that they're talking to. It's important that that customer understand what they're getting for what they're paying.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt, again, elaborating on that, and that's great question here. So I'd like to wrap this webinar here today, and again, definitely thank everyone, Reed, Matt, and Buddy, and Beth, and other folks here that have participated with us today, and kind of gave us their hour of time to kind of learn more about these new technologies, and some of them are not as new, but definitely invading the small, medium-sized business market here. Again, I'm wrapping this up, but if anyone has any additional questions after reviewing the presentation deck for either Integra and Fostar or TechGen, definitely submit the questions directly to me or post your comments on the WebEx platform, and I'll be able to reply back or have Matt follow up further on the discussion, or have Buddy again follow up, and we'll make sure that we do the thorough follow-up in answering all the further going questions here as we're going to be distributing this on. But again, thank you, everyone, and you guys have the rest of the day, and enjoy the rest of the day. It's sunny outside in Minnesota here. We're almost hitting 50 maybe today, so good times. And I will, stay tuned for our next webinars going forward.